I have a couple of days' worth of questions to ask, but I would rather that we look to the audience and look online to see what questions we might have. I can't see if anybody's at the microphones. I have, there's a question. So we need to we found a microphone, perfect.
So my question is that one of the issues that has come up for communities where the local economy has been focused on resource extraction surrounds jobs. And the populist attitude has been, well, we've been coal miners for generations. Why are you taking this industry away from us now? The traditional solution that's been implemented is to say something like, oh, we'll do job retraining and help you find work and help you work with newer technologies, but there doesn't seem to be much trust generated by that kind of solution. And so where and how can public administration, community nonprofits aid in regaining that community trust to help actually put forward the real solutions that'll work for that community that you hear about by listening to what the community thinks they need?
Thank you. Anyone want to tackle that?
Of course, we, in this race and in this process to a low carbon economy, knowledge economy, of course there is going to be transformations. And there are sectors that will be more affected than others, and we have to work in a just transition and inclusion for workers and trainings. That's why the educational and the skill upgrade is so central to any movement in this direction, and that's why it has to be a holistic and not a tunnel vision. We have to think about not leaving nobody behind, and this will be through a just transition in which everybody is implicated. And in that sense, you know, I have talked, for example, with small communities. In my province of Quebec, there are some small cities that has been developed around a mining. So what are they going to do? We have to think in, even though mining is not sustainable per se, we have to think in beyond the lifetime of the mining. And the mine has to think about the community. What are they, and rendering the building capacity and making them resilient, so when they are gone, there is still activity of different nature in that community. And with respect, for example, with the fossil fuel workers, I have talked with unions with them, and they have told me, I'm a welder, I'm an electrician. Whether it is to work in an oil well or it's in a wind turbine, it's the same. So I think that we have to take out those barriers, and we have to think more holistically and at long term and in sustainable terms. I hope some elements of answer are there. Thank you.
Well, I'd also add, right, the question is how do organizations help communities in which the main resource of extraction both is no longer available and or is not really enabling of environmental possibilities or is detrimental to the environment. How do organizations help? And here I would like to suggest that there is, and I'll just take a step back and say this is drawing on some of the research that I've done with Natalie Slawinski here at the University of Victoria, back in Newfoundland, or exploring organizations in Newfoundland about community redevelopment, and maybe challenge the question a bit, because community redevelopment requires both a commitment from community members and their own self-determination to advance their community, even as it values and benefits from outsiders who enable and bring in resources. And one of those resources, by the way, is new ideas when you've been living in a community and potentially a community that's depressed and continually being depressed. So there is this tension, if I were to draw on my own sort of mental space as an academic looking at organizing, there's this tension in the organizing of the value that the outsider brings, the organizations, and the value that the insider brings who's living it in reality. And I think that part of the organizing that we've seen back in Newfoundland of communities that were engaged in community redevelopment to overcome the limited fisheries and cod that were available. The organizing happens by bringing together the insiders and the outsiders. Now, that's not easy to do. That is really hard work because there's, again, differing perspectives, and that's the courageous hard work, I think, of organizing to enable to enable a better solution.
Great question. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hello. You spoke about capitalism, and you spoke about how, as a successful capitalist, there's an incredible amount of freedom and sort of power that comes with that to make change. My question is, given the issues of really, conflict of interest, the sort of ego, individualist ego, and trying to get people on board with a just transition, would that not all be made easier if a more democratic economy was brought in to the economic sphere, whereby everyone could have that power shared more equally amongst each other? Thank you.
Kresse, do you want to try it?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea, and of course I agree, because we have had rising inequality in most countries since the 1970s, which means there are less people with economic power, there are less people who have the opportunities that I've had to set up a business, and there are less people who have the capital to invest in businesses and therefore, benefit. So when you have, and this kind of could solve the community problem too, is that we don't often see all of our assets as shared. I grew up in Edmonton in the 1980s. I benefited from an unbelievable education. That was me benefiting from a shared asset within society. And I don't think when large extractive industries go into a place and set up a mine that they think of the 40-year program to reinvest in that community. And they're not often taxed that way. So yes, I am a capitalist, but I think a lot of people wouldn't consider me a successful one because I self-tax. Elvis and I every year have a tax party where we celebrate how much money we give away and how much money we give to the government, and we pretend that Boris Johnson hasn't spent it on something ridiculous, and that actually it's being spent on something good and wonderful. But I think that actually tax needs to be higher. I think financial transactions need to be taxed. I think jet fuel needs to be taxed. I think that would change the paradigm in capitalism, because it is too lopsided. It is, I was talking to someone earlier this morning, it is corrupt. And in order to bring that back into some sort of, ecosystem, we have to change the rules, because the monopoly system that we've got the cards are stacked against far too many people. And I think one of the most interesting, there's a new venture capital business that's set up in London, and the premise of this whole VC, the question they asked was, what if the person who has the cure for cancer in their brain is a 16-year-old refugee and has no access to education, no access to funds? We need to completely change how capital flows if we want to have a flourishing environment, and to bring in that the word democracy there, and the true impulse behind it is actually the correct word, I think.
I just want to add to that, and perhaps provide. I think that the problem may not be capitalism, the problem may be scale. The assumption is that capitalism can grow without any constraints. And that may be a problem of regulation, and tax is one way to constrain, to minimize. But I wonder if it's not the system of being able to grow new ideas and develop them, but rather the expectation and the norm that we have that if you're going to grow new ideas, they have to scale to such a great degree and then become outsized in terms of the power that they have over defining possibilities, but also as we grow to such a great extent, we no longer can see the possibilities for integration at a local level. And I wonder if scale is one of our biggest problems, and our solutions come from political space where we regulate, taxes where we regulate and we minimize the possibility of scale, and maybe our sociology around how we think about size.
I would like to add that, in every country, and when we compare economies in the world, we use this GDP. Which is an indicator of only one type of benefits, which is the financial. And we disregard all the other positive impacts, and we don't integrate that in that. And we use this parameter to compare us. I think that physically it's impossible to reconcile infinite growth, economic growth, as per GDP, with a finite planet as the Earth. It's incompatible. I know that some economists are saying what we need to do is decouple the growth from the emissions. And some people, like for example, UK, for example, has succeeded in doing this. So they are still growing, but at a very much slow rate from their emissions. And bravo for them. But I think until we don't realize what these scientists, Rayward told us, that economy should develop in a donut, where the floor is the social needs that we all want: access to justice, democracy, health, food, water, clean air. But the ceiling is the planetary limits. So we have finite resources that we cannot go beyond, because otherwise we don't leave this for the next generations, and we are not doing it in the right way. And yeah, thank you.
Don, I just want to add one more idea to this, which is the notion that we see, and we see this in psychology, we see this in experiments and research, that boundaries, boundedness, limitations enables creativity. And so the assumption, the capitalistic assumption of having limited boundedness in order to expand and create is actually a problematic assumption. But rather, if we create a ceiling, boundaries within which people have to be creative in their economic ventures, we enable more possibility and more creativity. And that would translate into what it means for government to create the possibilities for small self-determination with individual communities to create what's needed and bring out the wisdom in those communities for what's necessary locally.
Balgis?
In all our decisions, we need to aim at striking this delicate balance between our needs and aspirations and the capacity of the ecosystem.
It has been an honor and a joy to work with each of you. I'm delighted, and I have so many more questions. Before we go away, I wanted to introduce Natalie Slawinski, who has been the champion for this panel that brought us all together. She's kept us from going off the ledge a number of times, and has been a real spirit in bringing us all together. So I'd like to introduce her wherever she may be. Natalie, are you nearby?
Thanks, Don. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today, for sharing all of your vast expertise and insights with us. I feel so inspired. I feel troubled that we have solutions and we're not implementing them, but I feel hopeful because I know that all of you, each of you, is enacting solutions and inspiring and role modeling for others what can be done. So thank you so much. I am so grateful. And I have a small gift for each of you.
This is Wendy's book. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk more online. That's another edition of the Conversation Lab. Today we've replayed a plenary session from the Victoria Forum, Bridging Environmental Divides, Shifting Our Relationship with the Natural World from Extractive to Regenerative. If you'd like to see all of the Victoria Forum, you can just Google it, or go to thevictoriaforum.ca. This radio program and podcast is produced by CFRO-FM, or Co-op Radio, in Vancouver's downtown east side on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. This episode was cobbled together with some help from Natalie Slawinski and inspiration from Kim Sekon, Julian Anton, Ann Watson, and Jason Shaw. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for coming by.